1899, Ashford Manor, England. On a crisp autumn evening, Ashford Manor gleamed under the pale moonlight, its grand windows reflecting the dying sun like watchful eyes. Inside, chandeliers sparkled over polished silver plates and crystal glasses, each setting arranged with meticulous care. The air smelled faintly of candle wax, polished wood, and something deeper, an almost imperceptible undertone that hinted at secrecy, tension, and anticipation. Guests arrived in their finest attire, unaware that the evening's banquet would not merely entertain but orchestrate tragedy. They smiled, bowed, and exchanged pleasantries, oblivious to the silent currents of dread that threaded through the corridors. Whispers of the family's hidden affairs lingered behind closed doors. Servants' eyes flickered with unease, and the manor itself seemed to hold its breath. The contrast was immediate: elegance versus menace, ritual versus chaos, civility versus malevolence. Scholars debate whether human ambition, jealousy, or grief alone could explain the events that unfolded that night, while others insist that something far older, far darker, haunted Ashford Manor. Could a family's social obsession and obsession with appearances hide murderous intent? Did the very architecture of the estate, with its narrow halls, secret alcoves, and echoing chambers, become complicit in the horrors it contained? Psychological exploration questions the capacity for charm to mask malice, for tradition to conceal cruelty, and for structured ritual to become a stage for human destruction. The allure of civility can blind, the promise of etiquette can lull, and the trust embedded in social performance can be weaponized. Even in the flicker of candlelight, subtle signs hinted that the night would unravel into chaos. A servant's hurried glance, the unusual chill in the dining hall, the faint odor of something metallic lingering beneath the rich aroma of roasted meats. Each element seemed to foreshadow calamity, as if the manor itself were whispering warnings that no guest could hear. The boundaries between documented history and speculative horror begin to blur here, inviting viewers into a liminal space where fact intertwines with fear and perception becomes as treacherous as reality. As the guests took their seats, the silver plates gleamed innocently, reflecting candlelight like silent witnesses to the drama about to unfold. Laughter mingled with tension. Glasses clinked with forced cheer, and conversations danced on the edge of unease. Could a single mind orchestrate such devastation, or did hidden forces, human or otherwise, dictate the night's outcome? The introduction sets the stage for a story steeped in suspense, moral ambiguity, and unresolved horror, compelling viewers to navigate the shadowy terrain between civility and cruelty, trust and betrayal, and the human and the inexplicable. The banquet is poised to begin, and with it the first threads of mystery, fear, and enduring intrigue are woven into the night. 1899, Ashford Manor, England. The Harcourt family had long been the jewel of Ashford's social landscape. To the casual observer, they were the epitome of refinement, elegant, polite, and unfailingly charming. Their reputation extended across counties, whispered in admiration at local markets, echoed in church pews, and chronicled in society columns. Yet behind the manor's stately facade, the family harbored tensions that simmered beneath the surface, concealed beneath the veneer of perfection. It was a household defined by contradictions: wealth and insecurity, charm and cruelty, loyalty and rivalry. These contradictions would come to define the night of the infamous banquet, long before the first guest ever stepped across the threshold. The patriarch, Edmund Harcourt, was a man whose reputation for benevolence masked a calculating mind. He maintained the family fortune with strict oversight, demanding precision from servants, attention from his children, and unyielding obedience from his household staff. The family's wealth, inherited and carefully cultivated, carried with it burdens as well as privilege. Among the children, tension thrived. Evelyn, the eldest daughter, was ambitious and exacting, determined to secure a future beyond the shadow of her father's authority. Jonathan, the younger son, nursed jealousy, feeling overshadowed by both his sister and the expectations of a society that measured worth in achievement and poise. Rivalries were subtle yet potent, expressed through minor slights, withheld smiles, and whispered asides behind closed doors. Every gesture, every word carried layered meaning. The surface civility only heightened the sense of underlying menace. The Harcourt servants, too, were witnesses to the unspoken drama. Margaret, the housekeeper, had served the family for decades and claimed to have noticed shadows moving where none should, to hear whispered arguments echoing in empty corridors, and to observe expressions of fury carefully hidden behind polite smiles. Thomas, a young footman, reported seeing Jonathan linger near the wine cellar long after hours, as if rehearsing a plan only he could understand. These accounts, though dismissed by outsiders, offer glimpses into the charged atmosphere of Ashford Manor, where social ritual masked latent hostility. Clergy who visited the estate noted a pervasive unease. Reverend Alden recorded in his diary the feeling that something within those walls unsettled even the pious heart, a sentiment that foreshadowed the tragedy to come. The architecture of Ashford Manor itself played a role in the family's story. High ceilings, labyrinthine corridors, and hidden alcoves created spaces where secrets could flourish. The dining hall, where the banquet would later unfold, was grand yet imposing, with polished oak and silver fittings that reflected light in ways both dazzling and disorienting. Windows overlooked manicured gardens, yet these vistas of beauty also obscured corners where observation could go unnoticed. The manor's design allowed for both spectacle and subterfuge, creating a physical environment that amplified the psychological tension of its inhabitants. In this way, Ashford Manor was not merely a setting, it was a silent participant in the unfolding drama, a space that facilitated secrecy and provided cover for the darker inclinations of its residents. Financial pressures added another layer of complexity. Though outwardly secure, the Harcourts had long struggled to maintain appearances. Debts lurked in ledgers carefully hidden from casual visitors. Investments had failed quietly, and rumors of gambling among family members added strain. Such pressures often magnify latent hostility, and in the case of Ashford Manor, the desire to protect reputation sometimes outweighed moral restraint. The family's adherence to ritual, etiquette, and tradition became a mechanism to conceal both personal failings and potentially dangerous intentions. Here, social performance was not mere decorum. It was a tool, a weapon, and a mask, capable of hiding resentment, envy, and even premeditated cruelty. The psychological profile of the family reveals much about the seeds of tragedy. Manipulation was commonplace. Subtle gestures, controlled expressions, and the careful orchestration of perception ensured that outsiders remained unaware of the underlying discord. Compliance was enforced socially as much as hierarchically. Guests and servants alike navigated a complex web of expectation and implicit threat. Human behavior in this environment could easily tip toward destructive outcomes. The allure of charm masked intent. The promise of etiquette concealed motive. Even minor slights or imagined betrayals could be magnified into potent catalysts for conflict. In such a setting, the question arises, could a single individual engineer a catastrophe? Or did the social and psychological architecture of the household itself facilitate the inevitable convergence of malice and opportunity? Whispers of superstition and folklore permeated Ashford Manor as well. Long-standing local tales spoke of the estate's grounds being touched by ill fortune, of ancestral curses that lingered silently through generations. While scholars dismiss such notions as fanciful, these stories influence perception, shaping the lens through which both insiders and outsiders interpret events. Within the Harcourt family, these ideas intermingled with real tension, fears of scandal, reputational ruin, and personal failure. The boundary between rational planning and imagined influence blurred, leaving a psychological landscape in which menace could thrive unnoticed. Foreshadowing the banquet, subtle signs hinted that all was not as it seemed. A misplaced silver knife on the dining table, a whispered warning between staff members, a sudden chill in a hallway, each detail contributed to a mounting sense of unease. Observers noted the host's cold calculation, the way Edmund Harcourt's eyes lingered on guests with precision, the way Jonathan's gaze darted in corners, as though rehearsing unseen measures. These details, small in isolation, collectively painted a portrait of anticipation. The stage was set, the actors in position, and the mechanisms of control firmly in place. The audience senses that the forthcoming banquet is not merely a meal, but a carefully orchestrated social ritual, charged with the potential for harm. The Harcourt's public image remained impeccable, even as private tensions escalated. Visitors remarked on the family's grace, the beauty of their surroundings, and the warmth extended to outsiders. Yet behind closed doors, ambition, envy, and secrecy roiled. Every interaction, smile, and conversation carried hidden significance. This duality, perception versus reality, is central to understanding the unfolding horror. By the time guests would arrive for the banquet, the psychological and social dynamics of Ashford Manor had already created a fertile ground for betrayal, catastrophe, and the convergence of human ambition with darker forces, whether real or imagined. In sum, the Harcourts and their estate illustrate a complex interplay of status, psychology, and secrecy. Public respectability masked private corruption, loyalty coexisted uneasily with betrayal, and charm concealed calculation. The architecture, finances, and interpersonal tensions all contributed to a charged atmosphere in which social ritual could easily serve as a mechanism for harm. Subtle foreshadowing, misplaced objects, whispered warnings, and calculating observation prepares viewers to understand that the tragedy of the banquet is rooted not only in individual malice, but in a broader constellation of environmental, psychological, and social pressures. Ashford Manor itself, a silent observer and facilitator, stands as a testament to the ways human ambition, secrecy, and ritualized behavior can converge to create horror. 1899, Ashford Manor, England. Months before the banquet at Ashford Manor, each guest received a carefully prepared invitation, embossed with the Harcourt family crest and sealed in thick black wax. The envelopes arrived by post, their arrival marked by a sense of occasion. Servants delivered the missives with quiet precision, noting the subtle weight of anticipation that each envelope carried. To recipients, the invitations suggested a gathering of refinement and prestige, an evening of music, conversation, and the subtle gravitas of Ashford society. Yet beneath this surface of civility, the invitations carried a latent tension, a seed of unease whose presence only became apparent upon closer scrutiny. Every line of the ornate calligraphy, every flourish of ink conveyed meticulous care. The choice of language was deliberate, reflecting the host's desire to maintain control over perception and expectation. Some phrases emphasized nostalgia, mourning, or remembrance. Others hinted at celebration, subtly blending the emotions of reverence and pleasure. The contrast between appearance and hidden intention was immediate. While some recipients interpreted the invitation as an elegant act of family mourning, others, more sensitive to nuance or rumor, sensed undercurrents of malice. Words like honor and presence were imbued with psychological weight, suggesting both inclusion and compulsion. The Harcourt's reputation allowed them to leverage trust. Townsfolk, clergy, and acquaintances were eager to participate, unaware that each acceptance of the invitation was a step toward participation in a meticulously orchestrated social event, one designed to exploit expectation and obedience. Psychology played a central role in the orchestration. The invitation acted as a tool of manipulation, subtly framing the event and influencing behavior before a guest ever arrived. Social compliance is a well-documented phenomenon, particularly in structured hierarchies and close-knit communities. In Ashford, the weight of family prestige, coupled with the implicit expectation of attendance, created an environment in which guests were primed to trust appearances and follow social cues. Even minor anxieties, doubts, or misgivings could be suppressed by the pull of etiquette, fear of embarrassment, or deference to perceived authority. In this sense, the invitation was more than paper and ink. It was a psychological instrument, setting the stage for collective behavior to be guided by design rather than spontaneity. Local reaction was a mix of curiosity, admiration, and quiet apprehension. Letters and gossip recorded in town chronicles hint at unease. Some neighbors remarked on the unusual number of attendants, the precision with which the invitations were addressed, and the subtle insistence on formality. Dr. Whitfield, a local physician who had treated members of the Harcourt household, noted in his diary that the care lavished upon these invitations is extraordinary, as if the family were staging an event of consequence beyond mere social gathering. Likewise, Reverend Alden commented on the potential for mischief or scandal, though he refrained from speculation in public correspondence. Such reflections suggest that even well-informed observers could not fully anticipate the psychological choreography that awaited the guests. The day of arrival intensified tension. Carriages rolled down the gravel drive, their wheels crunching against frost-kissed stones. Guests alighted, their attire impeccable, their expressions reflecting polite anticipation. Yet subtle cues betrayed unease. A dropped glove, a misaligned collar, or a servant's lingering glance introduced uncertainty. Shadows in the halls seemed deeper than architecture would suggest, and the scent of polished wood and candle smoke mingled with an inexplicable undercurrent. Something metallic, faint, and almost imperceptibly foreboding. Each guest carried their personal anxieties, amplified by the manor's design. Corridors that curved unexpectedly, high ceilings that echoed sounds, and alcoves that concealed activity from casual observation. The architecture, previously a symbol of grandeur, now functioned as a stage for psychological tension, amplifying uncertainty and the potential for chaos. Interaction among guests was carefully orchestrated. The hosts, Edmund and Evelyn Harcourt, guided conversations with subtle authority, steering topics away from contention while ensuring attention remained on the social ritual. Jonathan, the younger son, circulated in a manner both attentive and measured, observing expressions and recording minor details that would later inform the unfolding drama. Psychological manipulation was ongoing. Smiles were encouraged, laughter elicited at precise moments, and minor confusions resolved to maintain the perception of control. Even the staff participated consciously or unconsciously in sustaining the environment of expectation, reinforcing cues that aligned with the host's intentions. Small discrepancies hinted at underlying tension. A chair slightly out of place, a candle burning unevenly, or a fork set at an unusual angle became significant markers within the meticulously arranged event. Guests, conditioned to trust propriety, often overlooked these anomalies, yet they contributed to a subtle, almost subconscious awareness that all was not as it seemed. In the coming hours, these details would amplify the shock of the events that followed, their significance retrospectively obvious once the surface of civility was irrevocably shattered. The Harcourt's choice of attendees further intensified the latent danger. Each guest carried personal histories, rivalries, debts, or secret knowledge that intersected with the family's own motives. Invitations were not random. They were a precise selection designed to maximize psychological leverage. By curating the mix of personalities, social status, and interpersonal history, the hosts created a social experiment where behavior could be predicted, guided, and ultimately manipulated toward desired outcomes. The banquet was therefore both a performance and an instrument, a controlled environment in which human ambition, fear, and expectation would converge, priming the scene for catastrophe. Arrival was accompanied by subtle foreshadowing of misfortune. Servants whispered in corners. The wind rattled windows at unpredictable intervals. Shadows appeared to move independently of their objects. Each incident, while minor in isolation, created a cumulative sense of unease. Guests were now immersed in a psychological environment that encouraged observation, suspicion, and anxiety without fully revealing the source. The tension was deliberate, methodical, and entirely orchestrated, preparing the audience to sense that the forthcoming banquet would be far more than a social gathering. By the time all guests were assembled, the manor was alive with controlled energy, a delicate balance between expectation and foreboding. The banquet, meticulously planned and psychologically charged, stood poised to transform the interplay of charm, authority, and social compliance into the stage for a night that would forever alter perceptions of Ashford Manor. The arrival sequence, with its combination of ritual, subtle manipulation, and foreshadowed tension, ensured that the guests were not merely participants but instruments within a larger design, bridging naturally into the catastrophic events that would unfold once the dinner commenced. 1899, Ashford Manor, England. The great dining hall of Ashford Manor was a study in contrasts. Crystal chandeliers reflected the golden candlelight across silverware, polished to perfection, yet shadows danced unnaturally along the walls. Guests, dressed in finery, moved with the practiced grace expected of Ashford society, yet beneath each measured smile lingered unease. The contrast was immediate and unnerving, elegance juxtaposed with tension, civility overlaid with subtle dread. No one could yet articulate the source of disquiet, but instinct prickled, an imperceptible sense that this evening would not unfold as expected. As the assembled company took their seats, the room seemed to vibrate with anticipation, a charged atmosphere composed of social expectation, subtle fear, and the latent malevolence of the Harcourt's orchestration. Edmund and Evelyn Harcourt, hosts of impeccable poise, presided at the head of the table. Their control was meticulous, a raised eyebrow here, a gentle nudge there, ensuring conversation flowed where they desired. Each toast, each smile was calculated. Psychological compliance was in full effect. Guests deferred to tradition, etiquette, and subtle cues from the hosts, often unaware of the manipulation shaping their behavior. The human mind, conditioned to trust social authority, was now subtly guided into participation in a scenario whose full implications remained hidden. Even minor deviations, an offhand question, a nervous laugh, were gently corralled by the host's influence. Conversation began with banalities, the weather, recent travels, minor gossip. Yet beneath each exchange lay tension, layered and nuanced. A misplaced napkin, a fork slightly askew, or a guest glancing toward a shadowed corner became symbols of unease. Certain attendants, more sensitive to atmosphere, noted these small anomalies, the way a candle flickered without draft, the odd echo of footsteps that should not have occurred. Whispers, barely audible, seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Some guests swore they heard soft murmurs as though the manor itself spoke, commenting on their words, their demeanor, their very presence. These supernatural undertones amplified fear while remaining ambiguous. Whether product of imagination, suggestion, or something unearthly, remained unresolved. The first courses arrived. Silver platters were set with care, garnished with seasonal fruits and delicacies. The aroma of roasted meats mingled with fragrant sauces, masking subtle traces of poison, chemical or botanical, indistinct in historical reconstruction. Guests were unaware, yet physiological effects began subtly. One guest, Mr. Harrington, complained of slight nausea. Another, Lady Blythe, experienced a chilling prickle of vertigo. Conversation grew strained as each symptom crept forward, barely perceptible at first, then accumulating into a shared unease. Social compliance held firm. No one immediately challenged etiquette. Laughter persisted, though faltering. Gaslighting emerged naturally. Neighbors reassured each other, attributing sensations to fatigue, indulgence, or nerves. The subtle manipulation of trust ensured that the onset of danger remained cloaked within normalcy, prolonging suspense and heightening psychological tension. As the evening progressed, the interplay between social ritual and latent horror intensified. Toasts became ritualistic affirmations of civility, even as shadows lengthened unnaturally along paneling and ceiling beams. Some guests reported seeing movement out of the corner of their eyes, chairs shifting when unoccupied, drapery quivering as if touched by unseen hands. Others heard faint whispers, indistinct phrases that hinted at accusation, forewarning, or admonition. These phenomena blurred the line between psychological projection and objective reality, leaving observers to question whether evil was a human creation, a property of the manor, or an external inexplicable force. Eyewitness accounts reconstructed through diaries, letters, and oral histories suggest that as the banquet reached its midpoint, confusion escalated. A servant allegedly dropped a silver ladle, the sound ringing unnaturally loud in the charged room. Guests instinctively froze, their compliance warring with instinctive fear. One account notes Lady Pembroke clutching her chest, muttering incoherently, while others leaned toward her, unsure whether to assist or observe. Edmund Harcourt, ever composed, offered assurances with an almost imperceptible edge of menace, calmness that paradoxically heightened tension. Moral dilemmas arose spontaneously. Should one challenge protocol to aid the suffering, or obey social norms and risk complicity? The banquet's subtle chaos reached further manifestations. Some guests developed tremors, pallor, and confusion. Conversations fragmented into disconnected fragments, punctuated by shouts, coughs, or sudden silence. Observers in diaries recalled a surreal distortion of time, laughter occurring before responses, shadows preceding movement. Psychological mechanisms, mass hysteria, suggestibility, social pressure, intertwined with potential toxic exposure or environmental hazards, creating a complex tableau in which causality remained opaque. Each moment magnified the tension between expectation and the unpredictable onset of catastrophe. By the final courses, the hall resembled a theater of surreal terror. Guests, struggling to reconcile propriety with discomfort, began to succumb more fully to the orchestrated or environmental effects. Descriptions diverge. Some claim fainting, some nausea, some strange euphoria or hallucinatory perception. The line between internal psychological state and external manipulation blurred, creating profound ambiguity. Shadows deepened, whispers became more insistent, and the very architecture seemed complicit, guiding attention, amplifying fear, and trapping participants within a spatial and temporal web of suspense. Philosophical reflection emerges naturally. Is evil an innate human capacity, emerging from calculated intent and social manipulation, or does it inhabit spaces, objects, and traditions, independent of the actors? The banquet operates as both ritual and revelation, demonstrating the fragile boundary between social performance and mortal danger. Each toast, each gesture, each observed anomaly becomes a lens through which the audience contemplates complicity, human psychology, and the potential for malevolence to arise from tradition, authority, or environment. As the final moments of the banquet approached, chaos and control intertwined seamlessly. Some guests collapsed, others trembled with indecision, and shadows seemed to reach into corners of perception untouched by candlelight. The manor, silent outside these moments, carried within it the residue of psychological pressure, ritualized authority, and possibly forces beyond human comprehension. When the banquet concluded, the silence that followed was profound, a haunting pause that left the assembled, and later historians, questioning what was real, what was orchestrated, and what remains inexplicably unexplainable. The aftermath, though not yet witnessed by the wider town, was set. Ashford Manor now contained the seeds of legend, a mixture of human malice, psychological manipulation, and uncanny phenomena, all awaiting discovery. This convergence of social expectation, hidden intent, and ambiguous supernatural elements ensures that the banquet endures in memory as both spectacle and warning, a chilling tableau in which civility masks horror, ritual conceals chaos, and every gesture may harbor unseen consequences. 1899, Ashford Manor, England. Morning arrived over Ashford Manor with deceptive calm. Sunlight struck the stone facade, illuminating gardens still brushed by the mist of autumn, yet inside, the grand dining hall held a silence so profound it seemed unnatural. Candles long since extinguished left pools of wax upon silver candelabras. The silver plates lay abandoned, untouched save for remnants of food that seemed to mock the elegance of the night before. Chairs were overturned, napkins scattered, and the polished floors bore the faint evidence of chaotic movement. The air was thick, heavy with odors of wine, faint decay, and a lingering scent of incense that some later claimed had not been lit. It was within this eerie quietude that the first servants discovered the aftermath. Guests collapsed, unresponsive, and the hosts themselves, Edmund and Evelyn Harcourt, standing with frozen expressions, their composure shattered only by the faint tremor of realization. The contrast was stark. Outside, the village anticipated another autumn morning of mundane concerns, unaware that inside the manor, law and reason would soon confront events defying comprehension. The first calls to local authorities framed the initial tension between formal investigation and communal superstition. Constables arrived with measured caution, relying on police manuals of procedure, while townsfolk gathered at the edge of the estate, whispering theories of curses, divine retribution, or hidden poisons. Reason met folklore at every turn. Officer James Whitaker, tasked with documenting the scene, recorded observations in a ledger with meticulous precision. Dates, times, locations, and the sequence of discovered incapacitated guests. Yet even his methodical notes could not reconcile the simultaneous appearance of inexplicable elements. The whispers heard by servants, shadows reported moving against light, and the unnerving calm of the Harcourts in the presence of devastation. Historical investigative methods offer insight into the early forensic lens applied to the incident. Constables collected remnants of food and drink, though contemporary techniques for chemical analysis were rudimentary. Witness interviews began almost immediately. Servants speaking under duress or confusion recalled fragments: a misplaced candle, a servant hearing a quiet laugh when no guest moved, an upholstered chair that seemed shifted from its prior position despite no human interference. Neighboring families contributed their observations, some admitting to seeing lights flicker in windows before sunrise or hearing muted cries through walls. Local clergy were consulted, providing a spiritual framework to interpret what some considered a moral or supernatural failing. Even the Harcourt's physicians offered conflicting accounts, noting sudden physiological collapse yet unable to determine causation without reliable chemical or pathological evidence. Psychological examination reveals the social dynamics shaping testimony. Grief, shock, and collective fear filtered perception, influencing what was recorded, remembered, and later recounted. Some witnesses minimized oddities, attributing them to imagination or stress. Others amplified anomalies, weaving into the narrative supernatural implications or moral judgments about the family's character. Diaries, both authentic and reconstructed, portray a community struggling to reconcile observed horrors with socially accepted behavior. One maid, for example, described hearing a voice whispering instructions no one gave, while a visiting neighbor claimed the shadows themselves seemed to move with purpose. Such accounts highlight the interplay between internal psychological stressors and external environmental stimuli, illustrating how human cognition interprets or misinterprets chaos in ways that blend reason with superstition. Conflicting accounts multiplied the ambiguity. Edmund Harcourt provided statements laced with composure yet evasive in detail. Evelyn Harcourt, conversely, appeared untroubled outwardly, yet private letters revealed tremors of guilt, fear, or calculated concealment. Servants' testimonies varied widely. Some claimed seeing deliberate actions suggesting premeditation. Others insisted events were entirely spontaneous or driven by invisible forces. Newspapers, when reporting the event, captured this tension between factual reporting and sensationalized rumor. Headlines alternated between Ashford Manor tragedy, poison or curse, and mystery at the Harcourt banquet, death in elegance. The conflicting documentation created a layered narrative that remains impenetrable, emphasizing the challenges inherent in distinguishing human intent from environmental or supernatural influence. Fictionalized letters and diaries, constructed to reflect period plausibility, enrich the narrative and illustrate societal response. A letter from Reverend Halcroft, for instance, discusses the moral weight of the event, juxtaposing divine providence against human negligence. In one diary entry, a servant records seeing a guest slump mid-toast, eyes wide with unspoken horror, yet Edmund smiles as if the world were as it should be. These micro-narratives combine to create a tension between human comprehension and residual ambiguity, illustrating how memory, rumor, and social expectation shape the collective understanding of catastrophe. Philosophical and moral reflection permeates the investigation. Communities confronted with atrocity must grapple with both causation and meaning. Was this the work of deliberate human malevolence, a lapse of ethical oversight, or the result of forces beyond comprehension? Moral philosophy interrogates the persistence of evil in social structures, the complicity of witnesses, and the fragility of human systems when confronted by events exceeding ordinary expectations. Investigators themselves struggled to reconcile evidence with the manifest horror, leaving questions unresolved regarding both method and motive. Scientific inquiry of the period faced constraints. Limited chemical analysis, absence of advanced pathology, and rudimentary record-keeping ensured that rational explanation remained partial. Yet investigators recorded anomalies, traces of bitter herbs, mild discoloration of wine glasses, and subtle chemical residues in the main courses. Though some posit accidental poisoning, others cite social dynamics, gaslighting, stress-induced collapse, and mass hysteria as contributing factors. Modern reinterpretations propose blended causality, partial human orchestration, augmented by psychological contagion and environmental influences. The town's engagement with the investigation highlights collective processing of trauma. Fear and fascination intertwined. Some residents avoided Ashford Manor entirely, while others lingered near gates speculating on hidden malice. Folklore quickly took root. Claims of ghostly movement, spectral laughter, or chairs shifting without contact proliferated. Oral histories passed down for decades emphasized the enduring mystery of the event. Each retelling fused factual observation with narrative embellishment, reinforcing the unresolved tension between law, reason, and legend. Ultimately, the investigation concludes not with clarity, but with persistent ambiguity. Evidence, witness accounts, and material traces yield multiple plausible narratives, yet none offer definitive explanation. The tension between forensic reasoning and superstition, between psychological analysis and historical reconstruction, ensures that Ashford Manor remains a locus of unresolved horror. Audiences are left to ponder whether tragedy was a product of human design, the unintended consequences of social manipulation, or the intrusion of forces beyond comprehension. The legacy of the banquet, sealed in diaries, letters, and local memory, bridges the immediate catastrophe to enduring myth, inviting reflection on human nature, the persistence of evil, and the limits of rational inquiry. Decades have passed since the infamous Banquet of Betrayal at Ashford Manor, yet its story continues to haunt collective memory. The estate, now weathered and overgrown, stands as a monument to a night where elegance and malevolence intertwined so seamlessly that the boundary between intent and accident became irretrievably blurred. Scholars, amateur historians, and curious townsfolk alike have attempted to parse the truth from rumor, yet every investigation seems to deepen, rather than resolve the mystery. Contrast persists throughout the narrative: science versus the supernatural, documented history versus legend, human agency versus forces beyond comprehension. Each lens through which the banquet is analyzed offers partial insight, but none provide definitive answers, leaving Ashford Manor suspended in a state of unresolved horror. One prominent theory suggests deliberate orchestration by the Harcourts themselves. In this interpretation, the hosts manipulated events with psychological precision, leveraging charm, authority, and subtle coercion to ensure compliance from guests who trusted the social ritual of the banquet. Letters discovered decades later, partially authenticated and partially reconstructed, hint at intricate planning. In one, penned in a meticulous hand, a Harcourt scrawled instructions to a servant about the timing of the wine and the arrangement of plates for the greatest effect. Critics argue these documents could be fabrications or misinterpretations, yet they persist in feeding the notion that human cunning alone could have produced such devastation. The psychological angle examines how social pressure, trust, and subtle manipulation can produce outcomes as fatal as overt violence, raising questions about complicity and moral responsibility. Was the banquet the result of calculated human malevolence, or did chance amplify already present tensions? Yet not all explanations rely solely on human intent. Folklore which flourished in the wake of the tragedy suggests that Ashford Manor itself exerts influence over those who enter. Witnesses, both contemporary and modern, describe lights flickering in unoccupied rooms, whispers echoing in hallways long after guests departed, and shadows that seem to move with intent. Some local historians speculate that a malignant presence may have been tied to the land or the manor's construction. In certain diaries, servants describe hearing footsteps on floors that no one crossed, and some recount seeing the guests' expressions contort into terror before any physical cause could explain it. These reports, while unverifiable, underscore the enduring tension between rational explanation and the instinctive human attraction to the supernatural. They suggest that horror might reside not only in human choices, but in spaces, objects, or memories that absorb and reflect malevolence across generations. Amateur investigators have offered alternative theories rooted in psychology and sociology. Some suggest that cumulative social pressures created a phenomenon akin to collective psychogenic illness. Guests, already anxious about social expectation, wealth disparity, or latent familial resentment, unconsciously contributed to their own incapacitation. Accounts of strange tastes in food, sudden faintness, and mass confusion could have been amplified by suggestion, rumor, and shared expectation. While less sensational than occult influence, this explanation underscores the fragility of human perception under stress, suggesting that ordinary cognitive and emotional processes, when aligned with social hierarchies and fear, can yield catastrophic outcomes. Scholars examining the letters, estate records, and oral testimonies note that even subtle shifts in instruction, position, or ritualized behavior could precipitate unintended consequences, blurring the line between intentional harm and emergent disaster. Other hypotheses emphasize motive rooted in familial intrigue and revenge. The Harcourt family, prominent and wealthy, maintained a carefully cultivated facade. Beneath this veneer, rivalries simmered, sibling jealousy, inheritance disputes, and grievances over perceived slights. Some historians propose that the banquet served as an opportunity to settle old scores, a social theater masking lethal intent. Evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Accounts of heated exchanges between cousins, the sudden absence of certain family members at critical moments, and subtle deviations in hosting protocol suggest strategic manipulation. This explanation relies on human ambition, envy, and cunning, emphasizing the moral lesson that appearances can conceal destructive intent. Yet, it does not entirely account for the reported anomalies of sound, light, and movement, leaving the supernatural or unexplained as persistent counterpoints. The enduring mythos of Ashford Manor feeds modern fascination. Students of psychology and moral philosophy often debate whether evil is an emergent property of social structure, a reflection of individual pathology, or a phenomenon independent of human will. Some posit that unresolved tragedies captivate collective imagination because they allow the mind to explore ethical dilemmas safely. Horror becomes a laboratory for examining morality, fear, and curiosity. The Banquet of Betrayal, with its blend of social performance, fatal outcome, and enigmatic artifacts, letters, diaries, and estate remnants, offers fertile ground for such exploration. It challenges viewers to consider the nature of agency, complicity, and the limits of understanding. Was the event solely orchestrated by a human mind, or did environmental, psychological, and perhaps unknown factors converge in lethal alignment? Reports of anomalous activity in the manor continue to blur reality and imagination. Residents claim to hear laughter during moonlit nights, footsteps on empty stairs, and whispers in rooms long abandoned. Lights flicker inexplicably, and the occasional apparition, fleeting and indistinct, is said to appear in portraits or hallways. Paranormal investigators document these phenomena with contemporary equipment, but skepticism abounds. Electrical faults, optical illusions, And psychological expectation may explain part of the experience, yet cannot account for the consistency and specificity of accounts spanning decades. Folklore emphasizes that the house itself, steeped in grief and secrecy, may perpetuate echoes of that fateful night, trapping memory, emotion, and perhaps malevolence within its walls. Modern reinterpretations blend the theories. Some argue the tragedy was multi-causal. Human malevolence set the stage, psychological stressors primed guests, and the estate's environment amplified fear and perception. Others insist that one factor, be it intentional poisoning, psychological contagion, or supernatural presence, dominates. Every analysis, however, encounters limits, missing evidence, contradictory accounts, and the natural human tendency to mythologize traumatic events. The Banquet of Betrayal remains a case study in the intersection of fact, perception, and legend, illustrating how unresolved mysteries persist in cultural consciousness precisely because closure is unattainable. Philosophical considerations deepen the intrigue. If human malice produced the tragedy, the case confronts audiences with uncomfortable truths about ambition, envy, and moral compromise. If environmental or supernatural forces played a role, it challenges assumptions about control, agency, and the stability of social rituals. In every interpretation, the story resists finality. Questions linger. Could the Harcourts have alone orchestrated such devastation? Was the outcome accelerated by fear, expectation, or psychological contagion? Did the manor absorb and reflect malevolent energy, creating conditions no human could fully predict? These questions defy resolution, ensuring the banquet's endurance in legend, study, and imagination. Ultimately, the Banquet of Betrayal thrives in its ambiguity. Each retelling introduces nuance, speculation, and psychological tension. Its persistence in local lore, scholarly examination, and popular fascination attest to the human need to confront horror, test moral frameworks, and explore the unknown. The legacy is not merely historical but experiential. Ashford Manor embodies the intersection of human ambition, social ritual, psychological vulnerability, and the haunting power of unresolved events. In every whispered account, flickering shadow, or mysterious letter, the story endures, leaving the audience suspended between reason and fear, fact and myth, curiosity and dread. The Banquet of Betrayal remains one of history's most unsettling enigmas, a story that continues to haunt Ashford Manor and the collective imagination of all who encounter it. The estate itself, weathered by time yet stubbornly intact, seems to breathe with memory. Windows that once reflected the glow of candlelight now shimmer faintly in the moon, casting shadows that shift with a life of their own. The silence of the halls belies a lingering presence. Footsteps echo where no feet tread. Laughter rises and falls in empty rooms, and the glint of silverware suggests dinners long past yet never concluded. This persistent duality, appearance versus reality, calm versus menace, forms the core of the banquet's enduring fascination. Contrast permeates every layer of the narrative. The refined elegance of the Harcourt's social rituals collides with the horror hidden beneath, creating a tension that invites speculation and dread. Psychological explanations, from manipulation and coercion to social compliance and collective stress, offer one path toward understanding, emphasizing the human capacity for both charm and cruelty. Yet folklore and local legend suggest another dimension, that spaces and objects themselves can harbor residual malevolence, bending perception and influencing behavior. The truth may lie somewhere between or perhaps outside human comprehension altogether. Historical records, diaries, and letters offer tantalizing but incomplete clues. Eyewitness accounts contradict each other, leaving gaps that imagination eagerly fills. Some interpret these inconsistencies as evidence of human cunning and deliberate orchestration, a coldly calculated plot executed with precision. Others perceive signs of forces beyond control, ritual, curse, or lingering supernatural influence that challenge rational explanation. This unresolved tension is central to the story's power, forcing viewers to navigate the uneasy boundary between empirical evidence and speculation, reason, and fear. The banquet endures not merely because of the horror itself, but because of its resistance to closure. Each retelling invites engagement. Questions about morality, agency, and the nature of evil linger, unresolved. Could a single individual orchestrate such devastation? Or did the circumstances, architecture, and human psychology converge in a perfect storm of catastrophe? Did the estate absorb and echo malevolence, leaving traces that extend beyond its walls, into memory, story, and imagination? These questions transform the audience into participants, encouraging debate and reflection that stretches far beyond the historical facts. Ultimately, The Banquet of Betrayal is a story without finality. Its legacy lies in ambiguity, in the spaces between certainty and speculation, in the chilling awareness that human ambition, fear, and perhaps something more inexplicable can intersect with devastating consequences. Ashford Manor remains a silent witness, a vessel of history, horror, and unresolved mystery. The clinking of invisible silverware, the flicker of shadowed light, and the whispered stories are reminders that some horrors cannot be fully explained. They persist, unresolved in memory and imagination, leaving an enduring mark on those who dare to ponder what truly transpired behind those gleaming plates, ensuring that fascination, unease, and debate continue indefinitely.